Hello all, in today's video I will show you how to use level sequences to smoothly transition into a cutscene or cinematic for your game. Let's jump in. First, in our content drawer, I will create two assets. I will right click, create a new blueprint from class, actor. I will call this BP underscore sequence trigger. I will right click again, go to cinematics, and create a new level sequence. I'll call this SEQ underscore cinematic. I will now create a series of actors in my environment that I will use to reference in my level sequence. So I will go to my Place Actors panel here. I'll drop down, and I will create a series of actors. So first, I'm going to create a series of spotlights. I'm going to press G so that I can see, the bounds of the actor. So where, the cone of the attenuation radius is. And I'm going to drag this into the center of my map. I will increase the intensity to maybe 25, something I like for my scene's exposure. And I will duplicate this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to then create a doorway. So I'm going to duplicate this cube I have. This is a base aligned pivot here instead of the standard cube, which has a center aligned pivot. So I like to use these, but I will change the Y value to 5 so I can create a sort of wall right here. And so I'm going to create 1, 2, 3 of these boxes that have measurements like this. And in our sequence, what's going to happen is we are going to approach this wall. We're going to enter our trigger volume, and then it will lift the door and we will see into our space. So I need to add a cinematic camera actor. So in my Place Actors panel, I will go to Cinematic and then Cinecam Actor, just right here. And I'll drag that into my space. I'm going to position it roughly where I think it might be in my shot. So I'm going to rotate it and put it sort of central to this door. And now let's add some keys to our level sequence. So first we'll create our sequence, then we'll create our logic in our blueprint actor. And I will drag my actors for my scene that I want to use in the sequence. So I'll change the thickness of this to 0.5 just so I can see there's, a little bit of a door right here. So I'm going to select my camera, my door, which I will actually call this door first in my outliner. So I'll select my camera, my door, and then my 1, 2, 3 point lights. I'm using Option or Control click to select all of my actors. And I'm going to drag these from my outliner into my sequencer. So once I've done that, it's going to immediately pop me into the view of my Cinecam actor. If I click this little white camera button here, I can go out of that. So I just have my sort of player camera. And you'll see that it has created a track for values associated with each of these. So I'm going to collapse all of these. So we have our camera, our door, and our 3 spotlights. So what we're going to do is we'll first do our door, and I will drop down here into my transform. And this right here, this little circle, is the key button. So when I click this button, it will add a new key at the time that this vertical bar is on the sequencer. So I'm going to click and just create my first key, which is my location, rotation, and scale under my transform. And then let's say it's a 2-second lift for the door. And I'm going to, in my viewport, I will move it up in space. Let's say about that much. And I'll click the transform key button again, and it will save that value. As we scroll through here, and if I go to the beginning and press play by hitting the space bar, you'll see the door lift. So that's good for the door. For the lights, what we're going to do is key them all together. So if we go drop these down and we go to our intensity, in the beginning, we want our intensity to be lower. So I'm going to set a key of, let's say 5 in the beginning and key that. 5 here and key that. 5 here and key that. Clicking the little white button here to key it. And then I'll drag and we'll say maybe this is a 1 second on time. So I'm going to type the value, let's say 50 here. I'm just going to make it super bright. 50 and 50. And then we will grab these keys here and I'm going to shift them. And I'll grab these keys on the bottom and I'll shift them. And when I'm selecting multiple things, I'm using Control and left click. So now we see that our door key is right here. So what we'll do is we'll open the door, we'll turn on the lights, go 1, 2, 3, and then maybe we'll give it just 1 more second. So I'll give it 30 more frames in the space as we fade out. So now let's do our camera work. So I can see a little preview of my camera right here. So I can see now it's properly oriented at central. And I can also use this little camera button here to assume the view of my camera. So I will click in here. And what I want to do is, so we're going to open the door. And then as the door is opening, we're going to, let's say, start the camera about right here. I'm going to drop down, get our transform, and we'll add a key. And then we'll add a second key. I'll actually do this at the beginning. We'll add this key, moving it forward in space. And we'll see how that looks. So now we're through the door. And we'll add a key. So we can see, let's change our focal length to 15, which will give us so the lower it is, the more kind of a fisheye lens it will be. So this is 15 and then this is 30. And you can see we're zooming in. So I'm going to use the 15 and you'll see that we'll pull through the door. We'll go 1, 2, 3, lights on. And then as these lights are happening, we'll also so let's assume the view of our camera. We will look up to the left. So I'm going to sort of pan left and I'm going to hit transform on my camera component, my camera actor. And then I'm going to, on this key, I'm going to look right and I'm going to hit my transform. And then I'm going to drag this key here to the 150. So I'm alt dragging to duplicate this first key. So you'll see that our camera motion will go as follows. We pull through the door, look left, look right, look forward. And then now what we want to do is blend. So if we right click our camera cuts, we're going to go up to where it says can blend, the Boolean up here in the very top. We'll set this to true. And then when that happens, it's very subtle. So you'll see a little yellow tab in the top of your camera thing, of your camera cut. So it's very small and you have to drag the arrow to, or the little panel to see it. So I'm going to say we're going to have a 30 frame fade in and a 30 frame fade out. So what that means is basically if my camera, like I come in from an angle with my character, it'll blend in this duration of time to the camera as I'm telling it to behave in this sequence. So let's save the sequence. And now that we have this, we're going to add our functionality in our blueprint. Okay, so we will open our sequence trigger we've created, the blueprint. I'll double click. and I'll go to my event graph. I'm going to add a single component. So I'm going to delete all these. I don't need these. I'm going to go add a component in the top left. I'm going to say box collision. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add event on component begin overlap. And in our details panel, by default, we should find that under the collision settings. So if we search collision, it should already say generate overlap events. Yes. And it's going to overlap all dynamic, which includes our pawn, which is our player. Make sure those options are similar. So out of the other actor, after I overlap the box, I'm going to test cast to character, which is going to say, is this a character? There's other ways to do this. Casting isn't always the best, but this is a way for this circumstance. We're going to say, we only want to do this once. So this is a one-time cinematic. So we're going to say do once. And since we know this is the only character in our scene, we're just going to use cast and then a do once. And what we're going to do is when we enter and play the sequence, we don't want the player to be able to move. So we're going to cache our character and our character controller so that we can enable and disable input during the cutscene. So I'm going to promote this to a variable. I'm going to say character. I'm going to pull off and say get controller. And then I'm going to say cast to player controller. And in this circumstance, again, we know this is going to succeed. Sometimes there's better ways to do this that, you know, in case you have AI pawns rolling around or things like that. So, you know, this is just for this circumstance. And we'll say promote to variable for this. And we'll say controller. Compile and save. We'll do this periodically in case anything bad happens. And I'm going to now pull off my character and I'll say disable input. So I'll drag this over here and I can just drag my character reference in here. And I'm going to get my controller reference and put it in here. Save. And I'm then going to say off this, create level sequence player. And I'm going to find my level sequence I've created, which is called SEQ Cinematic. I can either drop down in here or select it in my content drawer and use the arrow to select it. And then I will pull off of my return value and I will say play. And then I will also pull off this and say bind event to on finished. I'll pull off here and say create event. It's going to create a delegate that will fire elsewhere. And I'm going to say create matching event. And I will say enable input after cinematic. And then I will get these two variables. So my character and my controller. I'll copy and paste them and drag them down here. I'm going to drag my character and I will say enable input. Drag this in here. Drag this in here. Put a comment around this, enable input. And I'll just say overlap and start cinematic. And so I'm just using selecting and pressing C to add a comment. Just keep things tidy. So I'll save, compile, save, and we're going to actually select our box, go to our viewport. In our details panel, let's make this box extent 200 by 200 by 200, and then move it up 200 units in the Z. So it sort of is a big box that sits in the ground. I'll compile, I'll save, and now let's test this in our map. So I'll go to my map. And I will exit out my level sequencer. I'm going to drag my sequence trigger right here. Just going to place it right in front of my door. And I will test my map. First, I know that my camera exposure sequence and my player are different than here. So notice that when it goes bright, but we'll change that in a second. So I'll play from here. I'm going to walk in the box. I'm going to lose my camera controls. It's going to pull through, play my cinematic, and then return control to my player. Now you'll notice that at the end, all of my stuff returned back to the way it was. In order to make that not happen, what I want to do is select my tracks, and I will select all the things that I've keyed. So my transforms, my intensities, I'll right click and say batch edit sections. And then when it says when finished, select project default and change that to keep state. So that means basically on the last key, when this ends, it will maintain those properties. So let's test that out. And also change my exposure settings in my own camera because I know that they are different than default. So I'm going to now go in, I'll enter, and we'll see that it plays the sequence. Turn, turn, front, pull back. And now the door has maintained open, and I'm ready to enter my environment. That is all for today's video. I hope you all learned something new, and stay tuned for more Unreal Engine 5 content. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and let me know what you'd like to learn about next. Thanks all.